All righty. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, regardless of where you call home in the globe. My name is Bradley Davis, and I'd like to welcome you to the third and final session in our IIP Tips and Tricks Series 2 webinars, this month focusing, of course, on project management for the imaging informatics professional. As with so many other SIIM webinars, today's session is eligible to live attendees for 1 hour of SIIM IIP credits, which will be processed early next week and will automatically appear in your SIIMU account along with proof of your attendance. But all of that's background work for next week, so let's get to the details for today's conversation. Joining us to share their expertise are three phenomenal project managers, including Jamie Osland, the Clinical Informatics Manager of Diagnostic Services at St. Vincent's Health in Melbourne, Australia, Angie Madalol, the Senior Manager of Business Delivery at Hospital Diagnostic Imaging Repository Services in Ontario, Canada, and of course, our series host, Herman Oosterwyk, the President and Principal Consultant at OTEC, an imaging informatics training and consultation organization. Throughout today's conversation, we encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A module located in the middle of your Zoom webinar screen. And of course, don't hesitate to interact with presenters, SIIM staff, and attendees alike using the chat feature. Without further ado, Herman, take it away.
Wow, yeah, thank you, Bradley. It has been quite a journey. Last IIP tips and tricks already of the season. And very fortunate to have such an international faculty all the way from Australia and Canada to the state of Texas, where I live and present from. So we're going to talk about a little about project management. That was kind of interesting. Just chatting a little bit earlier with Jamie said project management is just about common sense, but you know, it's a little bit more than common sense. So we'll talk a little bit about, so we're going to talk about project management towards the audience, health imaging and informatics project managers, system administrators and IT personnel. So as a PACS administrator, IIP professional, there's no question that you will have to be involved with many different projects, and so project management skills are very important. So we'd like to give you a little bit a brief introduction. That's what I will do first, and I think the objective is really to learn from who has done it before. So that's why I'm so fortunate to have Jamie and Angie with us, because they are experienced project managers and they can share some of their project experience, and we'll focus on what did they learn so that we can teach or we can share that information with you. Now, I wanted to start out a little bit because when we think about projects, right, projects always look different to the different people that are involved. And if you look at this particular graphics, I think there's a good representation of like the customer, the project leader, the analyst, the programmer, the business consultant, the documentation people, and then of course the operation and how the customer was built and how it was supported, what the customer really wanted. So projects appear always different from a different perspective, depending on who's looking at it. And we, of course, what is it we want to do? Right? We want to make sure that we deliver what the customer really wanted. So let's go talk a little bit about what is a project anyway. So definition of a project is an organized effort, to bring about a successful completion. We don't talk about failure, we talk about successful completion of specific goals and objectives. And part of the project we start, let's say we have a project that starts next month and we end at a deadline, for example, December 31st. Right? So that's a definition of the project. And so many examples will be a new PACS system, a new EMR, electronic medical record system. Electronic medical record system could actually last many years. I think the deployment of the new EMR in the Department of Veterans Affairs in the United States is more than 10-year project. So multi-years sometimes. Construction of a new clinic and deployment of a new modality. You shouldn't underestimate that as well. Think about the introduction of a new memo unit, mammography unit, the 3D tomo. Right? There could be considerable impact on infrastructure, archiving space, training. So modalities, don't overlook that, right, as well. So that's a project. What is not a project? No, anything that is, clinical, operational processes, repetitive operational steps, regular workflow, regular operations, right? Now, you could actually have different time and interaction, but this is really a regular pattern. So what we're talking about is really a project with a beginning and an end with different goals. So not projects are scheduled outpatient, inpatient studies, or regular scheduled portable exams, or building or collections, right? Now, what is project management? So project management, and so I didn't invent this definition. I came from the Project Management Institute. So the Project Management Institute is very smart people. Project managers said, what is project management? Is the discipline. So it's a discipline. It's a job. And you actually can become certified at the PMP, Professional Project Management Certification. So it's a discipline for planning, organizing, and managing. Planning, organizing, and managing resources of your team to bring about a successful completion, because you want to be finished. After the project is done, we're done, the resources go to another project, and we're finished, right? Second, the application of knowledge and skills and tools. You need to have certain skills to bring a project to the end. You need to have tools, project management tools, whether it's simple Excel or whether it's some more sophisticated, complicated management tools, and techniques, right? To deliver project objectives that meet the needs of the stakeholders. And who are the stakeholders? Management, the customer, in their case, the patient, the physician, and expectations. And here's the key. Project management is all about prediction and prevention. So you constantly ask yourself the question, what if? What if, no, this happens? What if this happens? What if the so-and-so doesn't show up, or this particular part or piece comes in too late? Or what if I get a new modality and we need to reconstruct the building? What if the contractor has too much to do? What if? So we want to make sure that we accommodate for that. So not go with the flow, recognize it. Oh, we have a problem, and let's see how we can fix it. No, you want to be prepared. So one of the reason we talk about project management, because unfortunately, projects have a very poor track record, right? 70% of the time, healthcare technology projects fail. Isn't it amazing? 70%, sometimes almost can't believe it, like 7 out of 10, right? When the failure is defined, of course, unintended negative consequences like delay, overruns, we didn't meet our goals, or you just give it up, right? You let it go. 70% of the time. Isn't it amazing that only 3 out of 10 projects end successfully? And I have to tell you, what I've seen in many cases is that the key to success is a good project manager. The key to success is a good project manager that has the skills, tools, resources, and can actually deploy all of his capabilities and the skills to get it to a good ending. So, poor track record. So what are we going to do? How can we prevent not to be in that same poor track record? And what are some of the reasons of the failure based on some of the statistics? Number one, poor planning. Unrealistic time of resource estimates. So let's say we're going to get a new PACS system. Okay, we'll do the whole migration, the data migration before the end of the year, and January 1st, we're going to be live. Poor planning, unrealistic time. There's no way that between now and the end of the year, we can migrate all the images, train all the people, get the system here installed, get the hardware in time. Poor planning, unrealistic time, or resource estimate. We don't want to tell the management what they want to hear. We want to tell them the truth. We want to make sure that we have correct planning, realistic time and resource estimate. Or sometimes unclear goals and objectives. Well, we're going to do this, but what is it that you want to do? Right? Be very specific about your goal. We want to improve patient care. We want to become more efficient. Be very, very specific. Right? If you say we want to improve patient care, we said, okay, maybe we want to limit the amount of errors from or reduce the amount of, let me give you another example. Reduce the amount of retakes in radiology from 5% to 3%. That is specific. Instead of saying we're going to improve our quality, right? Very clear calls. Scope creep, very, okay, we're busy with a project. Oh, let's do this too. And let's do that too. Well, let's build this on this. And let's put another thing in there. Scope creep, very dangerous. Well, dangerous, very common. And before you know, you have this small project and became a big project, for which you don't have the right resources, not the right money, you have an overrun and so on. Another very important component is the executive support. Executive support. If you have a problem, you need to go to your manager, to your boss, to the executive board and say, we have an issue here, right? We are doing this project, we're replacing this PAC system, and this radiologist, I'm just making this up, this radiologist refuses to use the new PAC system because he doesn't like it, whatever. So there needs to be somebody says, listen, and this is the solution. You have to stick with it because this is what we're going to do. Now, why is it that maybe that radiologist says, I don't like it? Because maybe he was never involved with the selection. Maybe we didn't have a buy-in, right? So executive support and user involvement are critical for the success. Communication failures. If there's an issue, we don't know about it, right? If somebody doesn't show up, if the part doesn't show up, or something's not ready and we didn't know about it because nobody told us, right? We're not going to tell you, that is a problem. Skill set level, we need a skillful project manager, not only with technical, but also people skills. So these are some of the failures. Now, there are actually always constraints. There's always a give and take. And there are actually two different diagrams that I was going to show you. First is this triangle. And so there's always a trade-off between cost, quality, and time, right? So if you want to do a shoddy job very quick, right? You can do it very fast, but the quality will suffer. Or if you want to do an excellent job, you want to build something that is absolutely beautiful, costs a lot of money and a lot of resources and a lot of time. So it's always this triangle. When you push on one of those, you impact the other two, right? So scope, quality, schedules, cost, resource. So there has to be a balance. And in advance, you say, okay, well, I have so much money, that is our budget. We're striving for that particular quality and that particular scope. This is what we're going to do with our budget. And we can achieve it before the end of the year. Right? So you have to be very clear about that. So if the scope is increased, of course, you impact the two. But the time is compressed, you impact the other ones too. Another important aspect for the triangle is also this square that has to do with the customer expectations. Yeah. So the customer expectation also depend on the cost, time, scope, and quality. Okay? The customer, whether it's the patient, whether it's the department, whether it's your boss, whether it's the management, right, also has a certain expectation about the trade-off between cost, time, scope, and quality. Right? And you can see that over and over again. Just come up with, let's take an example. If you go to the county hospital here in Dallas, right, you cannot expect to get the same quality as care, but not the same quality in your room. You might share a room with two people, right? And maybe you don't have a choice for selecting for whatever you want to eat. Because if you go to a private hospital, and I have to think about my daughter when she was pregnant, and actually ready for the delivery, and I come to this beautiful suite, and of course that costs more money, right? So there's always a trade-off, and a customer expectation would expect that, and we know to expect that, that different treatment between different kind of private or the public hospital. So we have different customer expectations. So one constraint cannot be changed without impacting all of the other constraints. So if the scope is increased or the time is compressed as well. What is the role of a project manager? Well, we direct, supervise, and control the project all the way from the beginning to end. So you'll be involved with the project definition to make sure the scope doesn't exceed the expectations. You reduce the set of manageable tasks. So first we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. You get the resources for these tasks, right? Make sure that you have the right people to do that, right? So let's say we have a pack system installation, you have all the resources for installing the equipment, putting the computers up, the IT department and the networking people. You need to have clinical specialists to do the training, you need to get a vendor involved, and you want to build a team. Now, number two, you want to set a final goal. Said, okay, we're going to go live, and at that time, everybody is trained, all the images are available, and we want to motivate your team. Say, this is our goal, right? Whether September 1st, October 1st, whatever it is. You inform all the stakeholders of the progress on a regular basis. Okay, we're making good progress. After a week, we're ahead or we're below, ahead or below, right? You assess and monitor the risks. Say, what if? And then we mitigate them. And then we adapt and manage the changes, because none of the projects will always go exactly as we expect it to do. So before I give it to Jamie and Angie, let me share one more thing, actually two more things. But the first thing, what are some of the skills that you should try to get and try to learn for you to become a effective project manager? Now, first of all, you have to be a leader, right? You need to define a vision, strategy, and tactical direction. Right? You need to align the people. You need to motivate. You need to inspire people. If you go up and say, we're going to do this, then people says, okay, I'm going to follow him. I believe in him or her, right? You need to motivate. Number two, you need to have communication skills, writing, speaking. Some people have excellent writing skills. Some people have better speaking skills. Some people have both, right? Exchange information, oral, internal, external, informal. You need to be able to walk the floors and talk with the people, right? Vertical, horizontal with your peers, but also up and down. You need to be able to negotiate, right? Every project, you need to be able to negotiate. You need to negotiate for your resources, right? You need to get an agreement about scope, cost, and schedule changes. And you cannot be rigid. You have to be very, very flexible, right? I always remember, I have a European background, and one of the things that we always had problems with, we had different locations in Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States. And anytime we haven't wanted to deal with Germany, if the schedule changed, they said, okay, oh, we need to be a month late. In Germany is like, not to characterize or something or stereotype, but very, I wouldn't say rigid thinking. Well, you can't do that, right? So sometimes it's cultural. Like, okay, you have to be able to change, and you have to be able to make changes. So to be able to do that, negotiate, right? And it depends on really the person you're talking with, different culture, right? Different backgrounds as well. You need to be able to do problem solving. Okay, we have an issue right here. What is the problem? How can we fix it? And then influence, using the formal or informal structures, right? And sometimes it might be as easy to bring donuts in the morning as to create some goodwill to the department. Now, so before I give it to Jamie, so very important, project management is not one big thing. So you always have different phases, right? And this is a very typical definition of the different phases, like definition phases. We start it, initiation, plan it, we do it, we implement it, right? Deployment, and then the closing phases. And one of my good friends actually said, when you're done, celebrate your success. Or have a feedback session, say, what can we learn from the things that could have been improved? Yeah. Okay, so there was a little bit of introduction about skills, what is it needed, some of the background. So let's go now talk about the real life. So first thing will be Jamie. Jamie is going to talk about the doors must be open, ready or not. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Herman. Morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. Morning in Australia. So just in regards to this project, and in particular focused on an existing private radiology business, the scope was to literally just change their RIS and PACS solution. It included data migration, moving the data from one RIS and PACS into another business model and into a change of infrastructure. So new IT, new environment, RIS and PACS. So on the paper, you would say a fairly standard run-of-the-mill project. When we look at how this scope is, the one thing that came out during the implementation phase, in fact, during the initial implementation planning study, was out of scope work. In particular, the expansion of sites during the project and moving to a single site to a 3-site private practice. Now, that is a big change. That is a massive change for a project manager, and included changing all the WAN and things like that. So when we look at what happened during this project and get into a little bit more detail, one of the main things is the site was not prepared for any change whatsoever. They were still cracking through everything that they needed to do clinical. They had a lack of understanding of what was coming, why it was coming, how it was coming. There was misinformation provided by the client in regards to their readiness. Basically, it was a radiologist who said, this is what we're doing, but hadn't informed any of his staff. There was a single vendor working in isolation, which was the new RIS vendor, and they had been engaged with the clinical staff before I had arrived as a project manager. And they had partially built the solution into the test environment. Now, wrong, by the way. They actually hadn't done anything on that. There was some data migration components, and they hadn't engaged the incumbent RIS vendor for that, and there was massive timeline issues on getting that done. I went to a meeting, and the business informed me that they were going live with this solution regardless of any of the issues up above. So ready or not, we're opening the doors and we've got a commercial requirement to do so. So there was limited days to get live, and the business as usual activities just continued on with the main project resources embedded in their clinical space. So what do? Just in regards to lessons learned, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on this because I need to flush out a few of the issues and things like that. In regards to the lessons learned, one of them is you have to check. You have to triple check. You have to check it 5 or 6 times that everyone is on the same page. So when the site was marking things as, yes, we've done that, we required a triple check every single time to go back and prove that that work was done. And in probably about 40% of the time, in fact, it was closer to 60% of the time, this work hadn't been completed. So you have to triple check all the time. Agreements in meetings does not mean the work is done. We had so many meetings. It was a weekly meeting. I had nods. Yes, Jamie, we've done that work. Yes, we understand that work. And in the end, it was very, very evident that they didn't have the skill set to do that. The other thing was the business impacts and the timeline on the project resources. When you do these projects with small sites and in particular medical imaging, the idea is we can just continue doing our clinical work. We can just keep taking x-rays. We can still make the money coming through the door from a radiology business perspective. The simple fact is change is hard. You need to allocate resources. So if you change that diamond, if you change that triangle, you got to end up with issues. And one of it is just to make sure that you identify how to fill the technical gaps in resources as early as possible. Lucky for this project, I'm a technical project manager. We pulled in the resources to get the data migration, the integration work done. Not a lot of places have that resource on tap to pull that third party in, but that is one way to get it live. The other thing is just to keep all project managers. There was 4 project managers in this project, and one of them had gone rogue. They had decided that their project plan was the only one to work off. It's important, essential that there is one project plan everyone is on the same project page, and all the PMs agree that that is the plan. Without it, you don't have anything. And the last one that is a true lesson is be prepared for a bumpy ride. If you come across resource constraints, cost constraints, time constraints, don't expect your diamond to be a square or a diamond. It's going to be a very odd shape. You have to be prepared to go through the bumpy ride to get it live. Now, in this case, yes, we got live on the go live date. Yes, we got the data migration done. Yes, the cutover did occur. But was it a clean project? Was it something that I walk away and say that was managed really well? No, it's something that I walk away thinking I didn't have grey hair before I started that project. Now I do. It is really important, no matter how prepared you are, no matter what the scope is, to make sure that you can identify as early as possible what resources, what gaps, what cost, what timeframes that the client is going to enforce. And sometimes you have no control over that. So if you can pull resources, have them ready to go. If you don't believe the site is ready, inform them, but if they choose to go forward, know that you're in for the bumpy go live. Know that you're in for a project that may not be successful to what you term successful. But in the end, if the client gets live, even if it's bumpy, you've probably done a decent job. I'll let Herman move on to the next one, and Angie can have a chat.
Yeah, Angie, go ahead, Angie.
Great. Thank you, Herman. Jamie. Good afternoon, morning, evening, everyone. The project that I'm going to speak about first here is a repository called Consolidation of two imaging repositories. So repository A, originally serving 18 hospital corporations and 1 imaging clinic. Repository B, serving 22 hospital corporations and multiple clinics. Originally, the jurisdiction itself had 4 regional repositories, 2 of which covered over 55% of the approximate 14 million population. And of course, there was significant patient crossover and referral patterns between the health organizations. Repository A itself operated under a lead agency model. Now, if you're not too familiar with that term, just in this case, you can think of it as a program or project running at a hospital or shared service managing the operations and the key contracts for the repository services. The lead agency for repository A in this case, was a large university hospital that essentially made the decision to withdraw from its role. And this created, of course, the need for another organization to step in and assume the role. Repository B, of course, stepped in, which Repository B is a not-for-profit shared services corporation with ongoing operations that essentially assumed Repository A. And then just looking at what happened in the project. So there's quite a bit of detail here. So I'll explain a little bit of what happened before we go into the lessons learned. Just one more quick note relating to consolidation. The reason I'm using that term, there is actually a specific reason that I'm not using merger or takeover in this case. And really that's because Repository A was not a corporation. Essentially, there's no 2 companies or merger to take place or have one company take over another. So looking at what happened in the project, first part, the governance consolidation. Repository B assumed the main vendor contract from the former Repository A and began overseeing the operations. A new governance model was implemented. Examples there, changes and additions to the board of directors to ensure representation from all areas of the larger region and instituting common member agreements across all members. Now, the second part, so I'll spend quite a bit of time here. I think this is the main part and main discussion for this project, technical consolidation. In a single statement, I would say the technical consolidation was to expand the archive infrastructure of Repository B, migrate over 1 petabyte or over 20.6 million exams and reintegrate the former repository A hospitals to the new expanded environment. So we can go through, I'll go through a little bit of, I guess, in terms of the timeline, how some of what happened and work kind of flushed out. Just first looking at the environment build in the data migration strategy, there was a 2 to 3 month period really where there had to be a lot of planning, not just project planning, but specifically planning on how the migration and migration tools would work itself. And once that, that phase and building out the environment was complete, moving into the migration, which 15 months, about in terms of timeline, to migrate all of that data. There was multiple work efforts, though, of course, within this migration timeline, including migrating patient records, patient reports, setting up a duplicate HL7 feed to keep patient records up to date until the reintegrations. All of these work items, kind of overlapped and became part of the timeline to migrate the 20.6 million exams. The longest element, of course, was migrating the exams, which was originally targeted for 9 months. The source for repository A, their historical exams, was in a data center in another city. So there were many investigations, performed to increase line speeds and to look at throughput and make improvements to transfer of data. Everything going over a wide area network at this point. This was extremely challenging, let's say, for the project and the project team. There were times when the migration would slow down, and estimates were up to hundreds, 100 and 200 days to complete. And so the team, we did have to take a reset by the 6-month mark. An options analysis was completed and decision made to move the storage and basically rack it in the destination data center. Now there was, careful coordination and some costs involved there, but they were able to be accommodated in the project budget. Essentially, this greatly improved the migration throughput and the estimate to complete for the migration portion of the project. So let's continue with the hospital reintegrations to the new environment. So there was a 1 or 2 month period around the 11 and 12 month mark relative to the start of the data migration, that those were completed. Once the 9-month mark hit, just kind of to note there, this was where the moment happened. The pressure was on from repository B's funder to complete the reintegrations. By the end of the 12-month mark, a hard date was given. At that point, the project was tied to the end of contract for the former repository A's vendor. And there was significant operational cost savings to be realized by completing the project. Anyways, continuing on, the timeline constraint came into play. The reintegrations were expedited, and then at the end of it, the project was very complex, but it was successful, and it was completed by the hard date and within budget. Jumping just to the lessons learned. So really there were a couple of key things and just really surrounding around the data migration. Taking much longer than anticipated was one of the biggest issues and challenges for the project. I spoke about multiple networking investigations, but essentially the key lessons learned for any large data migration project or any data migration project where it's possible, ensure the source and destination systems are connected at the same location with the highest possible speed connections. And that really, helps with the throughput and keeping all your estimates for completing data migration. Data migration issues as well in context of this project slowed down the migration. So, rework and such was required sometimes when formats and data structure issues occurred. The biggest lesson there, so really ensure that there's anything that you can do to make sure that there's access to that source solution made available, or from the vendor, I guess the outgoing vendor, where it's necessary, create statements of work or contracts with vendors to ensure that this access is provided. Use escalations with vendors when they're not delivering early on. And even if, last case measure, use penalties within contracts or POs or statements of work if you can, as a mechanism to influence vendors, particularly in the case where one vendor that you're migrating from is coming out of the picture. Some of these types of measures are very key. And then the last item, so I guess this one here is lessons learned, but it's a positive lessons learned, and something that was great for this particular project, utilizing a PM for portions of this project with very explicit technical expertise and background in complex data migrations. That really led to, help on the success of this project, using PMs that understand the work for very complex projects to ensure success is an excellent lesson to in a positive light.
Okay, thank you. So let's go back to Australia. Jamie, you're up next. So next project.
Okay, so I'll spend more time on the lessons learned, or what happened, I should say. So the scope is pretty standard. Okay, 200,000 exams per year, medium-sized hospital, medical imaging department complex. Changing their PAC solution, RIS isn't changing, updated infrastructure, updated archive layer, compute layer, and the data center managed by the local IT group. Pretty standard scope. That was good until we turned up and the CIO at the business decided to dictate that they wanted a different assessment phase. They wanted to look at outsource or cloud-based infrastructure. So the reason this is really relevant within the current environment is looking at what IT groups may dictate to a business, or may be informing the business of what they need. So keep in mind, everything is locally IT supported, data center, VM, all of the archive sits within the IT stack within the local data centers of this hospital. The new requirement that we were giving was that cloud was not only preferred, it was the only option we should look at. The local IT group would not support infrastructure or any data center components. Infrastructure on-premise was to be phased out, and the assessment requirement was cloud only, a hybrid cloud and on-prem with IT supported, and an on-prem with many services. So if we can just leave that there for a sec, Herman, what was really important during this phase is the business and the clinical requirements that were assessed had to come into account when we did the RFT. When we went to the assessment phase with the vendors, we had to go back as part of the RFT and ask for resubmissions specifically around 4 options, one of which had been completely taken off the table. At the beginning of the RFT, on-premise IT supported infrastructure was the assumed model that we were working under. And that word assumed comes into this a lot. So when a CIO dictates, or when the IT department starts to pull away from certain things, it's really important that that assumption goes straight out the window, and you have to go back and reassess all models with all vendors that are presenting you a solution. Keep in mind, this is a PAC solution. We're not talking about an EMR. We're not talking about a RIS, PACS, a VNA, or any of those scenarios. This is a PAC solution. Now, in Australia, a cloud-based PAC solution is not the thing that is done at this time. Now, there's reasons for that with the wide area network and the internet speed that we have, but that in itself had to be then assessed. Just moving on to the lessons learned. What we were looking at is understand and document what the clinical and business requirement, and I'm just going to focus on that clinical requirement as well. If we can just pause that. The reason that I say that is the medical imaging clinical requirements and the clinical requirements of access to imaging is really rapid. It is really a rapid turnaround. So when you start to do your assessment, make sure you understand what the clinical limitation can look like. Do they expect an X-ray to be ready within seconds? Well, there's a lot that does. 99.9% of the time, they want the download of the first image within seconds. How do you do that with a cloud solution? How do you do that with a hybrid solution? What kind of metrics can you pull from that data? From a business point of view, try and understand why this outsourcing of infrastructure data center, what is driving that, and understand how the length of time it is to get to that end goal of cloud. Actually, does it exist? Is this a idea that's popped into the CIO's head, or is this real? Is this a business requirement? Now, that's really important as a PM to be able to flush that out and to put that down into documentations. The next lessons learned is you have to go back and you have to ask the vendors for multiple solutions. And by that, I mean, put it on paper. Ask them as experts of their solution to design or put forward a design of infrastructure that meets those 3 or 4 criteria. Cloud, fully cloud, hybrid, on-prem. Put those forward. Make sure they come back with documented. And if you don't understand it, challenge it. Push out and ask for further information. Thoroughly assess each presented option from a technical point of view, from a cost point of view, from a delivery of the core solution and clinical requirement point of view. And that's essential. You can't just sit and say, it costs less. Well, what costs less? Does it cost less as a capital expense? Is it more expensive over 5 years? How long are you having the solution for? And does it deliver me the core solution? i.e., my clinical users can press a button and get an image within blah seconds. If that can't be met by any of the solutions, it needs to be excluded, regardless of cost versus benefit, regardless of the system. And you have to be objective. Unbiased opinion is really important as a project manager. If you're documenting up all of the solutions and you're putting the cost versus benefit together, you may technically have a desire to go a certain way over another way because it's easier, you know it's going to work or whatever, but you have to do a fully objective assessment every single time as a PM. So in the end, the solution for this project was put forward as an on-premise infrastructure managed by a third party. IT no longer involved. They stand up the network. The data centers that they said, we're not having anything to do with data centers. To be honest, I can understand why. They'd cut the power to half the data center. There wasn't network run to half the data center. They hadn't been managed in the data center for a number of years. So bringing in a third party to manage the solution, to build your archive, to have a standalone sounds like an overspend, but in this case, it was actually the right way. The other thing is that the reason that cloud was discounted was coming back to that clinical requirement. In our instance, to get a chest x-ray returned for PACS for reporting, just a chest x-ray, not a CT, not a PET, not anything major, just a normal chest x-ray. It was calculated between 5 and 6 minutes for returning just for ingestion. Now, a lot of that has to do with the design, has to do with the application, has to do with the WAN, has to do with where the cloud is placed, how the cloud is working. And once again, that was based around our business. I'm not saying that cloud is wrong. I'm just saying that in our case, it didn't meet the clinical and business requirements, which is the availability of an image. A hybrid model is being assessed, but within the 5-year window, the 6-year window, when it comes to hardware replacement at site, where we believe the maturity of the cloud solutions and the network will be in place. So it's really important, once again, be objective, get all the information. If you don't know what you're assessing, get someone in that can assess it, that can pull the data for you and can review it in regards to that. So there was a lot of lessons learned. It is prevalent because I get asked about cloud a lot. But the main reason for going down this route was to do with the clinical and business requirements, not necessarily the infrastructure or the nice to haves. So that's it on that one, and I'm back again for a third in 5 minutes.
Hey, Angie, go ahead. Peer reviewed.
All right. Hello again, everyone. All right. Yeah, peer review shared service. Okay, so we had basically a three-phase project that occurred: an RFI to identify vendors that can, provide a regional solution for a shared service; business case to, confirm viability for the shared service and confirm member interest; and then an RFP, an implementation to really procure and stand up the solution. Going on to, so what happened? Okay, starting out with the technical solution. So essentially when the project was implemented, there was we implemented the solution with three available models. Intra-site peer review, which is peer review conducted within a hospital on its own. There was also a cross-site peer review model where more than one hospital can peer review each other's exams and reports. This model works well for a shared service because there's advantages for smaller hospitals that don't have a large radiologist group, or for hospitals where radiologists may be able to, still guess who the original radiologist is, even with anonymous peer review. And then the third model was the on-demand or specialty peer review, where a larger hospital can actually just put forth specialty radiologists to perform peer review on demand, potentially help smaller community hospitals. From the shared services perspective, establishing, of course, a support model, operational roles and responsibilities, and also implementing financial model and services agreement with our participating members. And then lastly, this is kind of where the last part of peer review relating to the program itself. There was a separate project that was conducted in parallel by the vendor of the peer review solution to establish the program governance. So updates were provided to the vendor back to the technical project on decisions that were made, relevant to the technical implementation. Information such as decision on targets for peer review, rules and alerting. There was actually a toolkit that was prepared that could be used anywhere across the jurisdiction to establish a peer review program. However, there were challenges, with the toolkit itself and with the program governance piece. It was a point in time setup to help implement peer review. And the toolkit itself, of course, being produced by a vendor is not necessarily advantageous or solution neutral. So at the end, the project did go live with 3 hospitals using cross-site peer review and 1 hospital using intra-site peer review. Not exactly the uptake that was originally planned for the shared service. The first lessons learned, looking at the solution itself, it didn't really meet all of the needs. So, an example with anonymizing the original radiologist in the report text, this was met only if the hospital or shared service itself stripped that information from the HL7 message before forwarding to the peer review solution. So the key lesson there is, establish comprehensive enough RFP requirements, ensure the RFP process gets vetted, that vendors get vetted for partnership fit through your RFP process, and ensure that vendor contracts are set up to hold the vendor to provide the required functionality. And then the second, key lesson learned relating to the low adoption, primarily in this case due to the lack of the ongoing program governance at the hospitals. You really want to ensure that the operational program governance is established, not just point in time or project level governance to implement a solution. You want to ensure that items such as handling ongoing, advocating for peer review, ensure that the peer learning and case review occurs, assigning roles and responsibilities, improving peer review workflows, anything that ensures reporting back to your overarching DI or strategic program that your peer review falls under. Really ensuring that program governance is in place and maintained on an ongoing basis will usually, lend to a more successful shared service.
Thank you, Angie. So, Jamie, we have a little bit of time left. So, if you don't mind, see where you can speed up a little bit, and because you really, this last use case is really important as well. Okay, go ahead.
I can talk extremely fast, so but not
that's
that
okay.
All right.
Okay.
So a private radiologist group purchased a new practice. They have to integrate their solution in. They wanted updated infrastructure, and they just want a single reporting group for the reporting solution for the radiologist group. So what happened is, in a nutshell, we had 4 vendors that we had to deal with. Vendors A, and we're contacted to one practice, vendor B to the reporting team. Basically, A and B had to be aligned. Vendor A only integrates with the RIS vendor A, doesn't have any knowledge whatsoever of RIS vendor B or PACS vendor B. So if you're confused, so was I. There was so many different vendors going each way. So the requirement was PACS A and B must be data aligned and RIS A and B must be data aligned. The issue is no one had any integration knowledge whatsoever within the company that had purchased the practice, and the RIS vendors didn't want to speak to each other whatsoever. They were contractually not obligated to do so. Nothing like that occurred. So what do you do as a project manager? And, those 3 pitches are actually valid. Get very good at buying coffees, muffins, or in some cases, whiskey, or whatever your drink is of choice. Find something to build a relationship, but you have to get the integration knowledge fast. If you don't have it, if you can't get it, what you don't know as a project manager, if what is feasible, what the company is asking for, is that even achievable? And you have to be able to communicate that results back. The best way to do that is you build relationships across all the vendors. Get to know their integration guys, get to know their specialists, get to know what's driving this, and see if you can find a way forward. Be the go-between, be the mediator, make sure that you get everyone being your mate in an Australian term. Make sure that you are the one that they come to and say, oh, I can do this, I can do that. And you can document everything up, and then suddenly you have an integration way forward as a project manager. In this case, it fully integrated. To be honest, it wasn't ridiculously hard. What needed to happen was a little bit of sweetening. As I said, the 3 icons in the middle helped immensely.
Good
so
for you.
That's that one. Move on with the questions and answers.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you bring this up, because there's always a human aspect. Definitely, you work with humans, and that's very, very important. So, in conclusion, project management is definitely a skill that you need to have as an imaging and informatics professional, and many, if not the majority, of all the projects fail on over budget, time. And so the process really is the discipline. It's really essential, and often the challenges are personal and people related. So learn from your peers, find out the lesson learned. So back to Bradley with questions. Go ahead, Bradley.
Thank you so much, Herman. Great job, everyone. As always, this is a phenomenal presentation with a lot of great information. We already have questions coming in. Probably my favorite one, starting right off the bat. Amina wants to know, do you have any tips on getting project buy-in? Not just collaboration, but project sponsor buy-in, I think.
What do you think, Jamie?
I could take it if Angie's still offline. So, okay. The simple fact is everyone has their own reason to want something to succeed or fail. Finding that reason and finding that something that they can actually buy into with the project is important. Now, if I'm speaking to an accountant or CFO, you're looking for financial. If you're speaking to the director, he's looking for ease of use or for efficiency gains or to stop the noise coming from his radiologist group. If you're looking from the ops manager, they just want efficiency gains and they want it done easily. What I'm saying here is it's easier to sit down and go through what the project is based on and try and identify from the users and the sponsors whether they can engage in it. Find the story that resonates with them. And I know that sounds soft skill. It is very much soft skill, but you have to sit and try and find that one thing that gets them excited. And if you find it, you'll get buy-in. It's as simple as that. If you can't identify it, then you have to keep trying until you will find one driver. Generally, you'll find one driver. Some people have 15.
Yeah, actually, another thing you thought came up too is not only buy-in. Another important part is a champion. You really need a project champion that's going to stick up and say, I'm going to drive this as well. Particularly a clinical champion, like one radiologist that's really going to really stand up and say, this is going to work, and I'm going to buy into it. Okay, Angie, you have anything to add here, or?
Yeah, just one quick thing. One other tip that sometimes helps is it always helps to do your homework, but present the opposite also. What happens if you don't proceed? What risks or implications do you face if you don't proceed with the project?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, Bradley, what's next?
Awesome. So next question. Hypothetically, let's say that you as a project manager are being called in to replace a peer, potentially an outgoing employee who's no longer affiliated with the organization. And let's just call it what it is. They've left behind something that is truly toxic, it's dysfunctional, and it's just not working. And yet here you are, the new PM, to save the day, to figure it out, and to make everything happen. Where do you even begin? What tips can you provide for where somebody should even start when they're trying to get a project back on track?
Wow.
So I can start this time if if you'd like with a couple of these. There's quite a few. That's quite a feat, I would say. The first thing I would say, tip in this area would be, don't feel that you have to step in and continue exactly where things left off and how they are. Don't be afraid to take the time or make that statement to the project sponsor and key stakeholders that you need a little bit of time to do a reset and level set. You need to do that and kind of go through interviewing key stakeholders, the sponsor, SMEs, things like that. Get all of your ducks in a row to be able to put forth a revised plan and really identify what has been going on and where things can go better, and present a new plan going forward. But really don't be afraid to don't feel like you have to just jump in if there's a time constraint and keep going the way things are. That's one big part of it.
Jamie?
I would say also, don't be concerned with the result. If you do the cost analysis and the project and the way in which the project is going isn't just on track, it's just toxic, or the business buy-in, the benefits no longer exist and things like that, do your assessment, just baseline it and take the time. As Angie said, take the time to baseline it. And if at the end of that assessment, it's pretty clear you can't do it, as in it will not benefit the practice, communicate that. Be very, as I said, unbiased, objective. Just come in and do your job as a project manager, which is reassess, baseline it, and then if there's no way forward, communicate that and let the business make the decision on how they will.
Yeah. I like your answers, like taking a Texas term, don't shoot from the hip, take your time.
Take your time.
Take your time and don't be afraid of the results, because it is what it is,
You don't control it. As a parachute project manager or anything, you can't control what's being done. All you control is once you're there.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we're kind of on the top of the hour, right, Bradley?
Yes, sir. That was a phenomenal conversation again. And thank you all so much for sharing so many things, so many practical tips as well for how to get stuff back on track, particularly within the healthcare enterprise. For any of our SIIM attendees, thank you as always for attending these. We've definitely been experimenting with the various time zones and the timings of our IIP tips and tricks series. Just as a heads up, we will be taking a little bit of a summer hiatus but we hope to see everyone back again in the fall, hopefully continuing this conversation regarding project management and beginning so many more. Again, IIPs and SIIM go together like, well, project managers and conflict resolution.
Who knows? Thank you, Bradley. And thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.